I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we're taking a look at Groundhog Day, after day, after day, after day, after day. I'm your host, Bubba Wheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we're discussing Phil's 21st Groundhog Day that starts at 58 minutes and 36 seconds, with Phil angrily doing his Groundhog Day broadcast, and ends at 59 minutes and 20 seconds with Phil. It's going to be cold, it's going to be gray, and it's going to last you for the rest of your life. Once again, I'm joined by my guest, Heather from the MILFcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. It's not cold, but it is gray, and it's a little depressing outside, and it does feel like it's going to last the rest of my life at this point.
Yes, I have noticed a lot of rain these past few months, it feels like.
People don't... I'm from Detroit area in Michigan, and people don't assume that we have hot summers because we're in the Midwest, but it's usually high 80s, low 90s, and humid all July and August. And so far, all we have had is rain. It's been crazy. It's like monsoon season here. Not normal at all.
Yeah, I don't know how normal these Atlanta summers are, but it's been, pretty wet, pretty muggy, pretty hot, but surprisingly not as, like, we haven't been hit with any of the major heat waves that have hit, like, the West Coast or anything like that.
Fantastic. For you guys. Sorry, I care about you too. But I'm talking to Bubba right now, and I'm glad he's having a jolly good time.
Yeah, and today we're back to seeing Angry Phil, which we actually haven't seen a ton of Angry Phil. This is like angry but also depressed Phil here in this broadcast.
Yeah, I feel like this one in particular is where we're starting to watch him actually come apart at the seams, and it does make me wonder too how much time has actually passed between where the depressive state started. It's not a long period of time in the movie, but it feels like it is, which is an testament to the way that it's set up, but also Bill Murray again being absolutely amazing. But he's definitely coming apart at the seams here, and it's palpable. It's almost uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've noticed this time especially that Rita, her standing next to Larry, it's almost like she's clutching on to him.
Well, if we feel the rage and we feel the desperation and we feel that, I can only imagine how she does. And I'll admit too, I'm not a big fan of Andie MacDowell. Never have been, still not. Don't dislike her, but she's not someone I'm going to go sign up and see a movie for ever. I liked her in, I think, Multiplicity, and that's about all I can say. However, she is wonderful in this, and little moments like that where she doesn't necessarily have a lot to do, but she makes a lot out of what she does have to do is just amazing. Yeah. And you feel that discomfort, like what the bloody heck is going on here?
Yeah, like we don't see a lot of her, and she doesn't really get a lot of lines, or I've already forgotten. I don't know if I don't think she has any lines. She just like has like a head shake.
Yeah, it's just a moment of reaction.
But just the way that she's gripping onto Larry and like using Larry as protection, and just she has this confused look and just like a head shake. There's like a little bit of a narrowing of her eyes, but she actually does. I think she does do a pretty good job without having to do very much, and especially given how animated Phil is here.
Yes, and that's a lot of what her character does throughout the entire film. It is reacting to Phil. And while we're watching the loop from his perspective, it's still her playing herself so differently in so many different of these loops and timelines. And she really, really does a fantastic job. And she's likable in all of it too. Which again, I'm not a big fan, but I find her to be, no matter what happens, no matter how Phil behaves, her responses are usually full of kindness. This one is fear, but she's still not acting like he's a villain, which is how I think most people do or would, because she still sees him as a person, even though he's at this point very not so much of Phil left at this point.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of softness in her. I think you could call it. Like she's got a little bit of scare. Like she's a little scared. She's a little angry, but there's also that little bit of concern, and I think you could argue that she is playing just a little bit of concern for Phil, like what is going on with him for him to act this way after, he was a bit of a jerk the day, for her the day before. And I think she also does a good job of, going back to square one in each of these days and reacting to Bill Murray as if none of the other stuff had happened before, where Bill Murray is the one that carries the movie, that carries the emotional arc of the movie as it progresses. But Andie MacDowell's character, Rita, is really a static character, but she changes based on where Phil is in each day.
Which actually makes me feel like in some ways too that we get a little look into what it might be like to be an actor anyway. We get to they play things and do different reactions, for scenes and that kind of thing. They try different stuff. So we always see the end product of what one thing looks like, whereas who knows how many takes it took to get that, how many different versions of it happened before that. So this actually has to happen in film and TV all the time anyway. But we actually get to see it because it is, well, it's the time loop. It's Groundhog Day. She gets the reset. But it's I think that's part of the fun of it too. But she's kind of I feel like she's the heart of the story anyway. She's the goodness in Phil that he doesn't know is there yet until the end.
Yeah, it's like she is the type of person that Phil didn't even realize that he wished he was.
Yes, exactly that. And I think that's the best part of the whole journey. I mean, it's basically one big existential crisis. I mean, that's really what it ultimately is. And I mean, spoiler, if you're watching this or listening to this, I'm assuming that you've seen the film before, and we're not ruining anything for you either. But the evolution of what he goes through is kind of that. And they say people that go through, different forms of therapy and recovery and that kind of thing too, basically what ends up happening, and you said you've brought up prior to this, the 5 stages of grief, is you kind of have to deal with all of those parts of your personality, your life, and the things that stop you from being the best version of yourself. And once you do, you kind of have to grieve your past self. You kind of have to let go of who you were to become who you are. And there's definitely a lot of that happens throughout here. And sometimes it has to get really ugly before you can start to see some sunlight.
Yeah, I really agree with a lot of that, and we do see that in Phil's journey throughout this movie, because he really does transition from a being a very different Phil in the beginning to what he ends up with at the end. And I also think that a lot of what he is at the end was always there. It's just that he repressed it. Like he pushed it down because it wasn't, in his mind, it wasn't accomplishing anything for himself of where he was in his life.
Absolutely. And also too, I mean, as wonderful as it is, and how deep you can go with all of the underlying themes of this too, is there's a lot of darkness to this movie, and at the same time we find ourselves laughing our butts off in these like really really almost brutal moments. Like in this particular scene, I don't know anybody else other than Bill Murray that could play someone who's like this dark and angry and frustrated and at the same time be hilarious. I don't know anybody else that could do it. He does it in Scrooged like wonderfully too. Even in Ghostbusters, he's kind of an ass, and yet we still love him, and he's wonderful. But here he definitely goes to some dark places and can be quite cruel and in this case, intimidating and scary, and having an outburst that nobody understands but him, and we still are laughing in the scene, even though we're still feeling the struggle that he's going through. There's just so much going on. It's really really impressive, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is worth mentioning to, looking at this scene out of context. It is a very intimidating, like anxiety-inducing scene when taken by itself. But in the context of the movie, like based on everything surrounding it and what we've seen and what we know and how it's presented, it is funny. And it's weird to really think about that, how what we're seeing and what we're feeling are basically like two opposite things.
And that's what we ultimately find in comedy a lot. We end up laughing at things that are kind of dark. it I notice that a little bit more when we start getting into British humor specifically, but there's definitely a lot of that yin and yang, and somewhere in there there's the balance that makes it great. And I think this is why this is probably one of the better comedy films of its time, and why it's lasted for so long too. But there's also so much there for people to connect with, and I think that it is so palpable and available to anyone that we could all put ourselves in Phil's place. Perhaps we wouldn't go with the whiskey and the popcorn, but I think we all can kind of at some point see ourselves reflected in the struggles that he experiences. And sometimes a comfortable way of dealing with that too is through laughter.
And I do think that the structure of the film in general does also help, because with the context of the situation that Phil is in, this kind of reaction is a lot more justifiable, knowing that none of this really has any lasting impact on anybody that's surrounding him. And so that the lack of consequence does make it easier to laugh at.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Okay, again, spoiler, but I'm certain if you're listening to this, you've watched the film before. When we start getting into the deeper things, like when Phil decides to drive the car off the cliff, that shouldn't be funny. There is nothing about that should be funny, and it's hilarious. And a huge part of that, I think, is the fantastic point you just made, is that there are no ultimate consequences for those choices and those things that he does. So yes, we are definitely on the struggle bus with him, and the fact that he is in pain and this is difficult for him, and he can't figure out how to get out of this situation, which is also a good way to describe depression too. You don't know how to get out of it. You don't know how to navigate it. The fact that there are no consequences for his ways of trying to cope ends up making that all those behaviors somewhat easier to dismiss.
Mm-hmm.
And also Bill Murray.
Yes, that makes up for a whole lot. And I've heard a lot of stories that this, in a lot of ways, this is Bill Murray as a person. Like he, in a lot of, celebrity sighting stories involving Bill Murray, you get a lot of that. Him as a celebrity is that perfect mix of charming and a jerk at the same time.
Yes, that's what I feel like he probably is like in real life. And for that purpose, I'm not sure that I actually would like to meet him, because I don't get the whole celebrity overwhelmed thing or nervous or anything, but I feel like I would be too nervous to talk to Bill Murray. My knees would knock together and I would fall over. And it would be that exact thing. He probably would be a little bit of both. A little bit of both. And I don't know that I could navigate it.
Yeah, it's difficult because, if I think for a lot of people, if he crosses the jerk line a little too hard, then that kind of ruins your experience with a lot of his work. But you might get lucky and you get the more charming side of things, like moments that I've heard about where he like crashes a couple's wedding photo shoot and poses for several pictures with them.
That's awesome. I would still definitely sacrifice the knee-knocking nervousness to meet Bill Murray. Absolutely. But there would be a lot of anxiety on my part.
And then one other detail that I wanted to mention in this scene is that he mentions during his not a podcast, during his broadcast, that they used to pull the hog out and eat it. And that is actually true. And I think that, besides just an interesting piece of trivia, I think that does help build Phil's character as a person a little bit, because, and I think I've mentioned this before, Phil is an intellectual. Like, he's a smart guy. He's been to Punxsutawney several times, and even though he's disinterested in the job at the moment, he does have a lot of knowledge, and he apparently at one point did study the history of Groundhog Day in order to do good reports during the previous 4 years that he was here.
Yes, absolutely. And I also think it's a wonderful, wonderful point and observation on Phil. But I think that also, plays into the fact that he is overgoing there. He's done it once. He did all the work. He did all the research. He knows all the things that he needs to know. And now at this point, he wants something else to stimulate him, to challenge him. He doesn't want to continue to do this. He's beyond this. He's above this. And you see this with a lot of intellectuals. You see it with a lot of geniuses in film, TV, books, and on all the mediums, is how they do struggle in normal day-to-day life because they need more. They need more from it. And they aren't comfortable necessarily with anything that involves complacency, which would also explain a lot of Phil's, ambition in general, but also, like you said, being a kind, good person, the guy that's underneath everything that we get to see at the end, that hasn't necessarily propelled him forward on that side of his personality and that side of his his mind where he does have these ambitions and goals and things, and maybe being a little bit more ruthless does. But I think that's a huge part of, the frustration with having to go back there is I've done this song and dance. I don't need to continue doing this. I'm better than this. I'm better than these people. And that's how he feels when he first arrives, before there's a time loop.
Yeah, he really did have like a superiority complex, because one of the, he describes whenever Rita's, talking about how nice the festival is, about people singing and going to the fire and then coming back and singing again. His response is, yeah, they're hicks.
Yeah, he does. He does. He passes that judgment on everyone. He looks at what he sees on the surface and makes these snap judgments. And as time goes on, he gets to know them all, and there's obviously some revelations, but that is kind of how he sums everybody up, and it's not pretty, it's not nice.
And I did do just a little bit of research on, him talking about them eating groundhog, and according to Pennsylvania historian Christopher R. Davis, the flavor of groundhog meat described by locals is a cross between pork and chicken.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And going back to the 1880s, like in the early days of the actual first Groundhog Day festivals, the Punxsutawney Elks Lodge, which later formed the Groundhog Club, hosted both the annual day ceremony and a summertime groundhog hunt, followed by a picnic which featured a variety of groundhog dishes, as well as a groundhog punch, which was a combination of vodka, milk, eggs, orange juice, and, quote, other ingredients. And I did read a couple different things. Like, reading that, it made it sound like it was something that the people would drink for the festival. But I also read that was something that they force-fed to Punxsutawney Phil.
Oh.
And then that's later, it's evolved into, now they refer to that as the elixir of life, because in the mythology of Punxsutawney Phil, there has only been one, like, it's the same Punxsutawney Phil throughout the years for every Groundhog Day. And he drinks this elixir of life, or back then it was Groundhog Punch, and that would help, keep him alive for the next 7 years. Even though, typically groundhogs only live to be, like, I think 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah, I didn't think they lived that long. Wow. That's very strange and interesting. Groundhog Punch.
And they would, like, the groundhog hunt involved, like, people with shovels and hoes, and they would have, and also, like, the other type, the digging hose, but also, like, the rubber, like, garden hose type. Not a garden hose exactly, but that they would use the rubber hose to listen to the ground to help find the groundhog whenever it was underground.
Well, they're vermin, and Bill Murray was well equipped to hunt vermin from another film that he was in that people might have heard of. If you haven't, it's called Caddyshack, and that's a movie I know a lot of people haven't seen, so you should check that out.
Yes, but I actually haven't seen it myself.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, watch it. It's so delightful. It's very inappropriate and dated, but it's still a good time. I love Rodney Dangerfield and Chevy Chase in it, who are not the best humans on the planet, but they are indeed funny in this movie, along with Bill Murray. But groundhogs are actually, we have issues with them and different kinds of vermin that like to burrow underground and destroy all of our property. But that is the way you kind of go at them, and it's not a lovely, fun thing. It's kind of barbaric and it's kind of horrible, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Oh goodness! But the hoses, yeah, they'll get them out that way. They pretty much, that's what made me go to the Caddyshack scene. There's some stuff that involves that kind of stuff. You stay away from explosives. That's all. Stay away from explosives. Don't blow up your yard trying to get.
All right. Well, on that note, that's the end of my notes. Did you have anything else for today's loop?
This is pitiful. People worshiping a rat. That's it. It was great.
All right. Well, why don't you go ahead and remind everybody where they can find you online?
Right now, you can find the Man I Love Fun podcast / stream on the Twitch. We're twitching with all the young kids. You can just search MILFcast on there and find us. We stream every Sunday and Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'm waiting for myself to mix those up because I do it all the time. If you want to follow MILFcast, I like to post lots of fun stuff on the socials. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Just look up MILFcast at MILFcast. We're there. If you'd like to follow me, I'm on Instagram at HeaderTime1981. Mostly just doing yoga, hanging out with my cat, and I'm back to running. But, yeah, that's about it.
All right, and as always, I am Bubba Wheats from FlightStitesandMovieNights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubba Wheats, and you can find the show It's Time to Rewind here on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. You can also join our Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. They're on Facebook to join in the conversation, to discuss any of our episodes as well as anything time loop related. I'm happy to help grow that group, and you can share memes and anything else that you want there. And then as far as today, podcasting is cold, it's lonely, and I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life, I feel like.
I'm a god. Well, what if there is no tomorrow? I'm a god. There wasn't one today.
It's gonna be cold, it's gonna be gray, and it's gonna last you for the rest of your life.